Hi, I'm Alistair Grieg from Fastman. Today we're talking about permissions and access control for OpenText Content Suite and Extended ECM. So thank you very much for joining us. Managing information and access in Content Suite and Extended ECM is a challenge for a lot of organizations. The sorts of things that they have problems with are the sorts of things you see on the screen now. People not being able to control access easily, it's taking too much time, you're worried that we're not getting the access controls and permissions in place that we expect, and that we're afraid that we don't have the ability to be able to resolve anomalies quickly. A lot of the time these days, as we move to the cloud and we change our operating models, it's much more important for us also to have the ability to distribute the control of access and permissions, which is something that traditionally we never used to do with permissions with Content Suite. So Fastman's all about ensuring the security and integrity of your enterprise information. So that's a very central concept to Fastman and to our customers. And to do that, we offer a number of solutions, of which we're going to talk about one today. So our solutions cover a wide range of areas such as permissions and access control, data transformation, digital signatures and process automation, and we also have a technical services offering. But as I said, today we're primarily talking about our permissions and access control suite. So let's dig into it. So let's talk about what customers are looking for. Our customers are looking for when they talk to us about information access and control, bearing in mind that we've been working in this area for around 10 or 12 years, I should say. And we have come across a lot of different situations, but when it comes down to it, we see similar messages from customers a lot of the time. So customers actually want a simple way to control access to their information. They don't want complexity. They don't want opaqueness. They want transparency. They also need, increasingly these days, we need to be able to minimize the risk of information security breaches, because if we can't minimize those risks, then we are exposed both organizationally and as individuals. These days, it's much more common for individuals to be held accountable for these types of controls in their organization. So that customers are also looking for structured tools and comprehensive tools, tools that do a job well and do it without having to go into different platforms and jump all over the place to understand what's going on. So people need to be able to see what's going on and act on it quickly using proven, reliable, and well documented tools. You also need the comfort that any breaches can be quickly and reliably rectified. You don't want to have a situation where you have an exposure and the exposure affects your business, but you can't fix it. So these things need to be able to be fixed quickly and easily. So we also believe that customers deserve, and organizations deserve the ability to be able to address these types of requirements. So you deserve the tools to be able to do this quickly. That when you put a system in like OpenText Content Suite or Extended ECM, the last thing you want to have to do is to try and build it yourself, or come from an uncontrolled situation, if you like. So I think we believe you deserve the tools to do it, and also in those systems, once you put the investment in, once you put you deploy these systems for primarily the purpose of controlling corporate information, then you need to be able to trust that information and trust that the controls and the information that you're putting into that system is in a secure and controlled environment, and that you don't have exposures that you need to be able to address or you can't address. So these things are fundamental to how we believe and our customers what customers are looking for and what customers deserve. So let's move on a little bit and talk about how that relates to Content Suite and Extended ECM itself. So Extended ECM and Content Suite have a complex security and permissions model. It's integral and built into the product. It's not something that you just can choose to turn on or turn off. It's always there, but it's complex. So if we look at this sort of standard OpenText slide about security, application security in Content Suite and Extended ECM, you'll see there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of building blocks, and they all interact. And as I said, you can't turn them off. So it's designed that way, and it's good that it's designed that way, because that's what the platform a lot of the time is used for managing corporate information. And it's becoming more complex. The days of having a simplistic content suite or content services repository is long gone. So we now have complex environments. We have multiple systems talking to each other. We all have very critical business systems saving their unstructured data into Content Suite extended through the extended ECM model, increasingly so. So it's becoming more complex, not easier. And if you follow the logic through, these days when we're talking extended ECM, we're talking about roles as much as we are groups and users. And you'd think to yourself, well, that's going to make it easier because the lead application has the roles or defines the roles. We set up templates. It all gets deployed and executed in a very sort of top-down, well-controlled model. The reality is, under the covers, the roles makes it more complex because the roles are implemented using the same mechanisms that have always existed in the platform, and they don't remove the existing mechanisms. So you still have groups, you still have users, you still have permissions being applied to individual items. So the problems I talked about a minute ago still continue. You still have the situation where it's not transparent, it's opaque. You can't see what's going on. So you can put in a model, but how do you prove that it actually works? How do you make sure that it's compliant? How do you demonstrate to your auditors that you are actually meeting the obligations that you have? So these things are coming along and the systems are becoming more complicated. There are more controls in place. So this is the world that we live in with OpenText Content Suite. And it's not just Content Suite, by the way. All the other application products in the same sort of field have similar issues. And thankfully, with Content Suite, it's actually a relatively, with Permissions Manager on top of your Content Suite Extended ECM, we can actually address these far more effectively than I think you'll find with a lot of other products. Now, also, the other thing that people talk about is cloud. So why do customers go to cloud? They go to cloud primarily because of operational efficiencies and cost savings. That's the justifications you see with organizations moving to the cloud. In terms of managing the systems, it actually adds a bit of complexity because now you have multiple service providers involved, and now you have commercial considerations in place. Doing things that used to be simple internal service requests or activities now involve multiple organizations, so you might have costs to be considered. Whereas before you could just ask your IT person to make a change to permissions. We're doing a restructure, we're doing a reorganization, we're onboarding a new business unit, this sort of thing. Previously, you'd organize a team of people inside your organization and off you'd go. Nowadays, you're going to do a lot more of that with your service provider, your external service provider. So we need to have self-service. We need to be able to allow people to, as I said before, to manage and control their permissions and access themselves to a large degree. There are technical considerations as well. We're not going to really get into those today, but there are technical considerations you need to think about when you go to the cloud, particularly on a platform like Content Suite Extended ECM, where it has a complex deployment model. So it's not just a simple server or a simple service. There's a lot going on under the covers. So what do we do? So what does Fastman do? Our role in this space is to help you simplify the problem. What we're trying to do here, and what we've been doing for the last 10 or 12 years with this product set, is to simplify the problem. And we call that the triangle of trust. So our triangle of trust is a combination of Fastman products and OpenText functionality in the core suite, combined to provide you with a simple way to address the sorts of things we've talked about, the sorts of issues and the sorts of obligations and requirements we have running a system like Content Suite. So we start with permissions and roles. Okay, we start with what a user or a group or a role can do on a specific item level. So a specific item level means a document or a folder or a workspace, maybe a physical object, this sort of thing. So that's the traditional, see contents, edit attributes, delete, so on. That's the first thing. The second thing we do is we talk about what functions a user or a group can do regardless of the data or the feature they're using. So that means, for example, can the user download an item? Can the user browse or view an item? It doesn't matter whether that's in a particular folder or location. It's just a matter of whether that user has actually got, or that user or that group, I should say, has got the ability to be able to execute that function. And this is not transparent in the system, but when you execute, click on a button in Content Suite to do something, it executes a number of functions under the covers. And what we do is give the organization, the ability to control who can do what and where. And the good thing about that is that you can use that, for example, to control your read-only users. So there is no control over a read-only license. So you can use this access manager product, we call it, to control who can do who can actually execute the full named user functions. So that's really handy, and a lot of our customers use it for that purpose alone. And the third item is a pure OpenText piece, which is object and usage privileges, which you'd be familiar with, I'm sure, and that determines which features a user can use. So can they use web reports? Can they use can they create folders? Do this sort of stuff. Which features can they use? Which can they use Brava or Blazon, whatever they're using for viewing? This sort of thing. Intelligent viewer, this sort of stuff. So that's the third piece. The two red balloons are the pieces that Fastman adds to. The object and usage privileges, we work with the standard OpenText functionality. So between the three of them, as I said, we simplify this area and we come up with what we call a triangle of trust. You'll notice we don't talk about records management here. Records management, security clearance, and so on, they're not something that we treat within the basic permissions and access control area, but they are part of what we deploy. When you get down to a product level, functional level, you'll see that we do actually address those things primarily under permissions manager, under permissions and roles. So let's talk about a few examples. So functional restrictions. So we might want to stop what people can do, what they can execute based on location or attributes or classification. So you might say that for items that have got a classification of, as built, you only want, that don't have a classification of as built. You only want people to be able to access the items that have that classification, or to be able to download them, for example. So if you've got people that you don't want to have access to work in progress documents, then you don't set a classification or an attribute, and we restrict the ability to be able to do that regardless of permissions. So really, really useful sort of functionality, and there's a whole raft of different scenarios that you could apply to that one. But essentially it says you can apply a classification or an attribute to that to those items, and the functional restrictions will kick in. An example here of where we find people needing to have this type of capability is that if you have update attributes permissions in Content Suite, with the permissions model, you're able to remove a category. And it's not something you really want a customer to do. Now, a lot of customers, a user to do, a lot of customers have put in customizations to stop this. So it's just an example of where you actually need to modify the system to meet a pretty basic requirement. So we've productized that, and we've built it up into our product. And you can see there that it's a really good example. And here's another one where the use of groups to manage access to functions and content is inherent in Content Suite as well. So you can not only do we use groups to manage permissions, we use groups to manage access to features and content. So there's a crossover there, and we need to be able to manage that in a more granular way. Much more important to be able to do this in a granular way. Okay, I mentioned before about the read-only license model. This is a classic. As I mentioned, customers have this problem all the time. It's a functional restriction. If you look at the license agreement to EULA, it's a functional restriction, but there's no functional control to stop a user going past their rights, if you like. And you simply just have to do it manually if you don't have tools to do it properly. So let's drill down a little bit more into Permissions Manager. I'm not going to do a demonstration today. We do have videos on our YouTube channel available if you'd like to look at a presentation on the product itself. So we're just going to talk about it at a conceptual level and give you a couple of examples of where it's been used. So first off, we give you a dashboard. So we give you a dashboard to make it easy for you to work around permissions and access with Permissions Manager. We give you the ability to make changes with confidence. So you can do things like change permissions, replace permissions, remove and replace users, this sort of stuff, and the ability to roll back without having to go to individual items to avoid the click, 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 click scenario that we're very familiar with. It takes away the need to do ad hoc reporting and development. So a lot of the times with customers in this area, permissions manager removes the need for them to write reports, write web reports, this sort of stuff, and to maintain their own code base. We actually find that with our customers who have had this experience in the past, they're relieved that they end up with a fully supported product which doesn't need them to go back and do click changes to individual items, or to write script themselves and maintain their own customizations and reports. It also removes frustration. So if you don't have system admin access, as in a modern cloud environment, you only have business admin access, then it removes a lot of the frustration, because as a business administrator, you still have the ability to manage certain functions of the product. We give you a business admin their own features to manage. It also streamlines the onboarding and granting of access using a very popular compare groups function. So we do things like that. We can, for example, if you've got 2 users in your organization, one of whom can do certain functions, or one of whom can access documents in a certain way and manage documents in a certain way, but their colleague can't, then we give you the ability to be able to compare groups between the two and very quickly see what the difference is and rectify those problems. It's one of the most popular features of the product. And of course, at the end of the day, it's ensuring that your security model is compliant with the organizational policy. So we don't have the issue anymore that you've got a theory about how the permissions is implemented on your system, but you can't prove it. So you can ensure that your security model is compliant with your policy, which is really important. On a technical level, it now also supports containerized deployments. So we have that ability to be able to deploy into a containerized system, and that's the kind of the modern way of doing things. So the product is kept up to date. It's not something which is 5 years old and it's running out of date. It's certainly very current, very up to date with both the latest releases from OpenText and also the latest deployment models that OpenText is using these days. So the latest version of Permissions Manager is 22.2, and 22.3 will come out early in 2023. And as I mentioned before, we do support roles and workspaces. So if you're working with roles and workspaces now rather than groups and users, or a combination of them, then Permissions Manager will work across both. So as just a short, sweet example of the sorts of things that we can do with Permissions Manager, this is just a screenshot of the dashboard. So on the top, you have a picture of a screenshot of the dashboard. Underneath that, you have the standard permissions interface that you get with permissions out of the box. So you can see the difference. The top section of the screen talks about or shows you all of the access that's been provided, all the permissions that have been applied to items, and this is actually coming directly from a customer system, from one of our recent customer spotlights. So you can see that it gives you a lot more information very quickly, and you can also see the buttons across the top: the copy, the rollback, the search permission, the replace user buttons. You can see all those things. This is all part of the standard Permissions Manager product. So very effective, very quick, and very transparent. So you can see things very quickly. Another example, the ability to apply certain permissions to specific items in a folder structure. So, for example, if you just want to apply read-only or CC contents to a certain group on certain items in your structure, you can do that very selectively with Permissions Manager. You don't have to go through the standard model of saying, apply it to this and push it all the way down. So we have that ability for you to be able to apply permissions selectively based on your requirements, and you can do that in a folder, in a workspace, in a collection. So for example, if you wanted to get a collection together with all, say, everything that's got the word passport in it, and then remove access or remove the ability for people outside certain groups to see that information, you can do that very quickly using Permissions Manager. So it's very granular and a lot of control, and we have, and it says here, best practice. So we allow users to edit without edit permissions rights to view permissions objects, and we can do that selectively based on specific groups or users. So we don't need to just open it up to everybody. If you've got a certain number of people in your organization that you want to be able to see but not act on permissions, regardless of their other permissions on those items, then you can do that with Permissions Manager. There's a lot of functionality, a lot of features here that we're just jumping through very quickly. We're just trying to give you a feel for the sorts of things we do in our permissions and access control solution suite or set. I mentioned before the popular function of compare and copy group membership. Really, really useful. This is, as I said, this is coming from a customer system. The government of the Northwest Territory in Canada have been using Permissions Manager for a number of years. So this is their system with a compare group. So this is what I mentioned before about being able to compare the group memberships of one user to another user. In this case, it looks like it might be a group that they're comparing it to rather than a user. So it's really useful, really interesting, and really helpful. Now, also I mentioned before about self-service. With our permissions and access control solutions, and not just our permissions and access control solutions, but our other products as well, we're very focused on providing customers and users and organizations the ability to be able to manage more of their systems than they would have expected. So they can manage things like whether a certain functionality on that product is turned on or off, and to what level it's going to be able to be used by certain users, and so on. So really, really useful to have, and really valuable in a outsourced or a commercially sort of separated situation. And this is just talking a little bit about the journey that the government of Northwest Territory went through when they were deploying Permissions Manager. I don't know, the automation's playing up here on me. I'm sorry about that. So it's they've went through a journey with 971. They've been with us for all those years, so quite a long time. With Permissions Manager, as I mentioned before, we're doing a lot of releases. There's a lot of support coming through. So as I mentioned, we've extended the support for role-based access. We've extended support for cloud deployments. We're doing a lot of work in a number of different areas to improve the product. We work closely with OpenText. We are certified for the OpenText cloud, and we are also we have use cases in the OpenText cloud, been happening for a number of years now. We're a member of the Solution Extension Program, you might have heard. So we're a gold member of the Solution Extension Program for OpenText with Permissions Manager. So again, this is just recent new features. We've touched on most of these as we've gone through the previous slides, so I won't drill into them too much. There is a nice little add-on that you can get, which is called Permissions Manager for Outlook, which allows you to manage access through Outlook. And so you can validate, you can put links into an Outlook message, an email message, and you can verify that the people who are receiving that email message are actually going to be able to see the content. And that saves you the problem of people attaching documents to an email and then routing it around as an attachment. It also means that if someone else forwards it on, then the same thing applies. They can check to see if where it's been forwarded on, who's going to be able to see it, so on and so forth. It's pretty cool, and it's very straightforward and very simple to deploy. The second thing we're going to talk about here, the next part we're going to talk about is access control. Remember, we talked before about functional control. So we're talking about the ability to be able to limit who can do certain functions regardless of location. And we use the read-only access as an example. I'll just build this out. And so we're controlling what they can do regardless of data, feature, or location. We do it through a simple group membership. So once it's configured, you can just set it up and say people in this group can use these functions, people in another group can use other functions. And if they're not a member of those groups, it's a whitelist model, then they don't have the ability to be able to do these things. So basically it's turned off for everybody unless it's turned on. Now you can switch that on and off, and I'll talk about that roadmap-wise in a second. And when you combine it with Permissions Manager, you can see that there's a really tight-knit relationship between the two. So Permissions Manager gives you the ability to manage this permissions across the objects themselves and manage the permissions. and Access Manager gives you the ability to control the functions. So the two work hand in hand, and they use a lot of similar ideas. As I mentioned, it's done through a very simple user interface, the Access Manager side of things. So you can allow users to operate freely, or you can control them. And it's really simple list to control. And you can manage this yourselves. A customer can manage this themselves. It's not a predefined list. It's something which you can set up, and if people are a member of the group, then they won't have the ability to be able to do certain functions unless it's on the whitelist. So it's really quite simple. So where we're going with it, though, and this is the exciting bit, this is the bit that I wanted to talk about really regarding Access Manager, is that Access Manager is currently undergoing another round of development to the point where we're going to have multiple, sorry about that, we're going to have multiple profiles. So the profile concept comes from our digital signature solution. You might be aware that Fastman is a DocuSign partner. We have been for a long time. And in our advanced digital signatures solution, we have the concept of profiles, which allows you to assign controls based on a number of different criteria. So, for example, if a certain category has been assigned to items, or a classification has been assigned, or it's in certain locations, then a profile will kick in. And in the Access Manager example, a profile will determine what they can and cannot do for certain with certain sort of sets of functions. So that's coming very shortly in Access Manager, and we find it very exciting because it means that you're going to be able to set up multiple profiles, and of course, if you base those on things like categories or attributes or group memberships, you're going to be able to bring that into play through a business automation or process or workflow and turn access on or off very, very simply, rather than having to write workflows and change permissions. So you can do the permission side of things through those features, through those processes, but now you're going to be able to do the functional aspects as well to form a rule, which you can then basically use the rule in different places for different reasons, which is really powerful. And there's an example that we've talked to customers about recently. So determine whether a customer is inside the firewall or outside the firewall, and based on that, you can decide whether the user is going to be able to, for example, view a document or download a document. So if they're outside the firewall, they won't even be able to view it. And as I mentioned before, Fastman does a number of spotlights on a regular basis around these products. In the recent times, we have done spotlights with our friends at the Government of Northwest Territory and the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. These are all available on our website and in our YouTube channel. So feel free to go and have a look at those. So, and here are just a few more examples of customers that have been using the content, the Fastman permissions and access control products for a number of years, and some of the comments they've made to us about what value they get from them. And at that point, I just need to summarize and say thank you very much for joining us. As I mentioned before, we've been in this business for a long time. This has been a very high level snapshot of our solutions in the permissions and access control area. Please drill into our products, and if you've got any more interest, or you would like to know more about our products, then please feel free to contact us. And here's some of our contact details, and we'll be able to answer your queries. Thank you very much.